So today I'm here with David Jones. David is strength and conditioning colleague and formerly worked at Tennis Australia as a strength and conditioning coach. Worked with athletes like Krygios, for the ones who know tennis a bit. Now Dave is working with beach volleyball Netherlands.
Yep.
And formerly also sailing Netherlands.
Yeah, that's right.
Most notable successes, I think, the bronze medal at the Rio Olympics from Brouwer, Meeuwsen, and then recently the European Champs.
Yep.
Women, Meppelink and Keizer.
Yeah,
Welcome,
definitely.
Dave.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me. I saw your first intro with your request or your dream to interview Michael Jordan and Rafa, so I'm happy to
to align
to get a run on here before those guys. So. Perfect.
Yeah, I just had to put Rafa on hold.
Okay.
Because I knew you were going to Australia soon.
Glad you could bump me in. Perfect. Nice.
Okay. How did you get into strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I think probably a pretty similar story to a lot of guys. Just had a real interest in training and the training process as a teenager and growing up. Enjoyed my sport. Tried to be an athlete at different periods. So from there, that led me to a human movement degree in when I finished school, and that's knowing that I wanted to work roughly in that space, not knowing what that would look like, and sort of by chance, it often happens in life. The girl I was dating at that time, her father was a fitness advisor at one of the AFL clubs, so he really opened my eyes to what strength and conditioning is and the performance world. So that's probably what got me into it and interested and got me started with it.
And you're also a qualified physio, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I've done a human movement degree, did all the internships and personal training and rehab hospital, all that sort of stuff. Tried to be an athlete through that period as well as a volleyball player, and then made the decision to go study physio. And in that period actually got my first job in strength and conditioning with Tennis Australia, which I was in for 5 years, and then made the jump over to Holland. I've been here now 5 years already, so it's going quickly.
Time flies.
Yeah.
So as an S&C coach, what was your darkest moment?
Yeah, I think some of the worst moments are when an athlete gets injured. So especially if you're responsible or partly responsible in those situations. So the one that sticks out in my mind was an incident with a young tennis guy back in Canberra. We were doing some overspeed work with a bungee cord, and the bungee cord actually it didn't snap, but the attachment broke. So I was on full stretch, and he came back and cracked him in the stomach, and that was a nasty injury, but also one that could have easily been a lot worse. So if it had got him a bit higher or a bit lower, it could have been real big trouble. So,
or in the face.
Yeah, or in the face or anything. So I was really lucky that it wasn't worse than what it could have been, and I was also lucky that it happened to the right kid who took it well. Otherwise, I could have had some crazy tennis parent trying to sue me. So so it was a really that's one I still feel sick in the stomach thinking about it now. So that's one that stuck with me. And also other injuries that have happened along the way. So you mentioned Brouwer Meeuwsen, they've had some successes, but they've also had some other records on the World Tour. They were the first team to withdraw from a World Tour final with a forfeit without actually attempting to play. So that was also a moment where we're like, oh geez, we had to reflect on that and look at why that was and how we needed to do better.
So how has that influenced you, or what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think those moments trigger you to think and to reflect. So the bungee cord one, the tennis one, is obviously just be thorough with your safety and make sure that you're providing a safe environment for the athletes all the time. So that's just hard way to learn that lesson, but just be thorough. And with the Brouwer Meeuwsen one, it was probably actually triggered me to go searching into the numbers and into some of the workload stuff, and so that was a good one to turn into a positive from our program. So we took some good lessons out of that in terms of how to build the guys towards a tournament.
And then what numbers are you looking at?
At that stage, it was a patellar tendinopathy, and it was the weekly increases in the jump loads.
Number of jumps.
And so these guys had good success. They managed to play a lot of matches in that tournament, played 7 or 8 matches, but of course they probably weren't physically prepared to do that. So now we're looking at the percentage increase of jumps week to week, specific to Rob and what he could handle, and so that's given us a good guideline. So we have this 40% upper limit that we sort of try to stick to now, and so from making some mistakes along the way there, we've managed to keep him a bit more consistently healthy and on the court. So that was a real positive from that.
So what was your best moment as an assistant coach?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think there's not one that's sticking out in my mind. I think it's a really cool job where you get to travel the world, see lots of different things. So through work, I've been able to see things like Sam Stosur win US Open in 2011 was really cool. Through working with Tennis Australia, was lucky enough to see Rafa and Djokovic in, I think it was 2012 final in 6 hours or something. So just some really
Aussie Open.
At the Aussie Open, yeah.
2012, I remember that.
Yeah. So just some really cool like sporting events, and also ones I've been more directly involved with. Just the boys at the Olympics was cool to see. Also, Chris and Reinder at World Champs 2015 did everything but win the event. So that was so close. So that's how sport goes. That was also a moment that sticks with me. So,
what advice would you give your younger self?
I think it would be to be less conflict averse. So I don't think you have to go out seeking conflict necessarily, but not being afraid of it, I think, and at least having more confidence to have state your opinion, dig in on some issues, and have a constructive conflict, I suppose. So that took me a while to learn that can actually be quite a healthy thing in the workplace.
And that refers to working in a multidisciplinary team or with athletes? Or
in the multidisciplinary team, I think so. So I think early, if I could advise myself to earlier on to learn that lesson, to understand that you can and in fact need to dig in on some issues, and it actually helps strengthen the team having those different views, and as long as it's all done in a respectful way, it's a real strength of the team. So if I could learn that one, still learning it a bit, but if I could learn that one earlier, that would be a good one.
Yeah, there will be a question later on that topic, because it's very common in a multidisciplinary team. Everyone has a different view, which is, I think, how it should be.
Yeah.
Hey, what advice would you give young aspiring S&C coaches who want to break into the industry?
Yeah, I think young coaches, I'd be happy to share the same advice that was given to me. I think I still am a young strength and conditioning coach in the industry, I hope. But that's to work in different sports earlier in your career, just to broaden your horizons and get that broad experience and understanding. Practically, yeah.
Working practically.
Yeah.
Because,
exactly. Also, working abroad, I think, was good advice that I followed. I think that's really, if you talk about the softer skills of coaching, just it develops you as a person in general. Just being able to understand different perspectives, different cultures, and communication, and so I think having gone through that experience, you're a better coach coming out the other end of that. And the practical stuff, the advice that was given me was, get a broad grounding in your own training and experiences. So do an Olympic weightlifting course, or go train with some Olympic weightlifters. Get down to the athletics club, get involved in that world, know what running fast is about, and also do something at the other end of the spectrum in either the physio realm or Pilates realm. So you've got that broad experience across all the full spectrum to draw upon.
What's your coaching philosophy?
Coaching philosophy is to do what's right for any individual at any given point in time. based on the information you've got available. So yeah, maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but it's I think the important elements out of that that it's individual. So one man's meat is another man's poison. So you don't have to be married to any particular method. I think it's having as many tools in your toolbox as you can, as possible, so you can find the right method at the given time. And it also speaks to information. So that piece of it's about continually learning, continually developing, and the information, I think through my physio training, they're really drilling that evidence-based practice model. So of understanding the research and the literature, drawing upon your own experiences, and then also the beliefs and stuff of the coaches and athletes that you're working with. So trying to pull all that together to help make the right decision at the right time.
What person has influenced you most as a coach, and why?
I think Loris Bertolacci. He was the guy I was alluding to earlier. He was my ex-girlfriend's father. He worked in the AFL. He's an ex-Australian hammer throw champion, and real on the front line through the 80s and 90s of strength and conditioning in Australia. So he got me interested into it. He's a mentor to this day, and he's really helped me along the way. So I got a lot to thank him for. And also Tennis Australia early days, Ian Prangley is a great practitioner. He was also a physio and strength and conditioning coach. So he taught me a lot early days as well. And I think later down the road, all my colleagues here in Holland, we have our regular meetings, and you always take something away from those guys around you in your direct environment. So steal a little bit from everyone. Okay, sure.
Speaking about different individuals and dealing with expectations, very often, at least that's what I found in my practice, the expectations of the individual or what they like to do is not always what a coach believes is best for them to do. How do you deal with that?
I think there's a few pieces to that, or a few strategies I have to deal with that. I think often the programs I'm working in, it's a coach-driven or head coach-driven program. So I think it's important to understand your place in that team, and often you're reporting to that head coach or working with them. So often the first line is just giving feedback regularly to the head coach and reporting on those behaviours and attitudes and those things, and then it's up to the coach to decide how they want to deal with that in that scenario. Sometimes that might be just giving the green light back to you to address it directly, or they might deal with it in their own manner. So that's probably the first one. If it's the second strategy, if you are going to go into a discussion with an athlete around the difference in expectations, I usually like to prepare really well for it. So I wouldn't address it directly. I usually take my time to think, gather my thoughts, compose my arguments, think through what they're going to say back. So you're really well prepared for that discussion. In that preparation, I'm always writing notes as I go through my, reflecting on each session, taking notes on a few athletes. So drawing upon a few examples, or maybe going into some of the data that you might have collected that may be relevant in supporting your argument. So that's probably the second one, being really prepared and well thought out and rational in your discussion. And the third thing I can say on it is that it's much easier, and I also learned this the hard way, it's much easier if you've made those expectations clear at the front end. So if the goalposts are shifting as you go, then that's a harder conversation to have. If you periodically check in, like every season or every so often, on how you work together, what agreements do you make, what do you expect of each other, and also involving the athlete or the other staff member or whoever it is in that process, then it's much easier to hold them to the standards that they're sort of setting or agreeing to as well. So that's probably the.
And how do you do that? Is it formally, kind of as a meeting, or on the fly with athletes and support stuff? How do you do that?
When when it started, you just got to gradually work your way into a program, so it wasn't really formal at the start. And then after a period, I sort of tried to say, okay, let's have a proper sit down and actually have a chat about it. I think, but supporting that, it's always that mix of formal and informal. You have so many discussions and interactions on a daily basis. It's not necessarily one formal meeting. It's over time all these things come together. That's also to reflect on myself. Like, did I make the expectations clear? So, am I doing a good enough job of that? And then if that's in place, then you can take the next step and try to hold them accountable. I think with a head coach, for example, or other coaches or other staffs, it's good to, rather than reacting and waiting for the situation to happen, where 1 week before a tournament a player's injured, what are we going to do? Let's have that hypothetical scenario before time, and so you get to learn it, or understand each other better. Speak Dutch. Get to learn each other, understand each other, how we're going to react in certain scenarios, so you have a bit of feel for how the situation will play out.
Yeah, I think one of the best advices I've received in that context is start talking when things are going well, not wait for shit to hit the fan.
For sure. Yeah.
For sure. I think I've taken that to heart.
Yeah, it's good.
We touched on that earlier. In a team, in a multidisciplinary team, coach and the other staff members, everyone has wears his own hat and has a different viewpoint or his own viewpoint, and it comes to different views on things. How do you deal with that if you don't agree with some decisions or some arguments that have been made?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's understanding your roles and responsibilities and how the programs run. So often we're in the position where we give our best advice, and then if it's really clear that if someone's choosing to, okay, I understand your advice and I choose to go a different way, then it's big. You can then accept that if you've given that, spoken your mind and given your advice. I think maybe where I was speaking about earlier, what I didn't do enough earlier in my career was give that advice or give that opinion. So being a bit more forthcoming in that, and then understanding that it maybe doesn't go the way you want, but being able to accept that.
Yeah. And how do you do that? Tricky question.
Tricky question. Yeah, you sit on the table and it's a classic multidisciplinary team, and you have your opinion. Some things that I think have worked for me, like if we had different opinions on how to approach a rehab or whatever this scenario might be, I've called in like an expert into our group. So we got Jill Cook to come into the beach volleyball program. Skype call in, spoke with all the medical staff and the coaching staff, so everyone could get a perspective from an expert. So that was one strategy. The other one I've used is just some internal within your department, some presenting on your philosophies, your ideas, your approaches. So and I think at least the staff that you work with, then they maybe don't agree, but they appreciate that there's at least some thought and some reasoning going in behind your stance on an issue and your position. So I think that wins you some credits in that context.
How does a typical training day in a life of an SFC coach look like?
Yeah, the days can be really varied, which is one of the nice aspects of the job. Stuck to monotonous, so that's really cool to be able to go on a training camp or have variety in your work day. But a typical day will be some early morning programming stuff before there's too many disruptions in your day. Then we're usually in the gym early, 8 or 8:30 for gym sessions, blocker sessions in the morning. I build in some reflection time after that, so to debrief the session, think about it, take any notes from the session. That's usually a good window in the middle of the day we have a couple of fixed meetings, formal meetings, but also just informally, chat with the staff and athletes. And then the afternoon's pretty similar, another training time slot. And that training can be different forms, whether it's sometimes in the gym, sometimes you're at a pool, sometimes you're on a volleyball court. It can look different. That's a standard day for me.
Yeah. How do you design the training program?
Yeah, I think you need to gather all the relevant information and start from that. So we're working in Olympic sports.
What is relevant information?
Yeah, I think in the working with Olympic programs, so you sort of have that long-term plan or rough framework in your head. So maybe a 4-year sort of concept, or maybe with some of the talents even longer. So you have that roughly sitting there. Then you're probably planning on a yearly basis. Where are your events? Where are your peak moments, if there are any? Penciling those in and working backwards from that, and then the relevant information. That's a big part of our job, is sifting through. There's so much capacity to measure things and so much information out there now that sorting through information is a big part of the job. So I think combining that analysis of the sport combined with the analysis of the athlete, coming up with marrying those two things together to give you your immediate needs, and then making sure that your schedule reflects your priorities there. So I found Alex Wolf spoke about his performance problem-solving framework. That's one that interests me and stuck with me. So it's trying to figure out what the limiting factor is in performance, and then how you're going to address that, and making your program reflect that. So that's a little bit the process. Have the long-term plan, have the yearly plan, working backwards from that with all the measurement and monitoring data filtered through it. So that's a little bit my process.
Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Yeah, I think Victor Ampelhoff would be a good one to have a look at. He's always got some interesting thoughts on sport. Also, Scott Dickinson is probably a good one to chat to. He's back in Australia now, and Narelle Simti is probably also worth looking up at some point.
Aussies.
All Aussies, yeah. So,
Okay, good.
Nice.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers, man.